I'm going to try to give you some insights in some research that I've been doing. Some of you know that I was originally a scientist working in chemistry, but especially in the field of the invisible things. That means in radioactivity. So I was using that, saw the effects of it, usually detrimental effects of it. It had it at least on myself. So. And I've been investigating more and more the invisible field, including what's going on in neuroscience and what's going on in biochemistry and in biology, and trying to make a combination of that to present you some of the things that we are familiar with and some interesting viewpoints that are, let's say, new to us, or new to science as well. Because science has been developing things and just dropping now and then a few characteristics of things that they found. And of course, just as we are sometimes when we make new developments, we are going into chaos until we find some new order. Yeah. And then if we change, then again we go into chaos, and then we find again some new order. Yeah. And so it's constantly moving. Now my original things were like in Micho's book, when he's talking about influence of food, and of course, as usual, we have these implications of 1 to 7. Yeah. And so for each mineral there is 7 proteins, and then it goes and multiplies by 7. And then of course the visible world is usually 5. That's why it's visible, 5. And then we have the invisible world. You can divide into large waves and short waves. And you see the proportions of what we eat, you may say, what we take. That's usually, you may say, our physical part that goes to our cells. And then that's actually the biggest volume, is the invisible world. Yeah? Short waves and large waves. And of course I was working in that field of especially short waves. And then when I started microbiology, actually my first encounter with yin and yang was with the Chinese point of view, with the Oriental medicine explaining how life was working, and I was so happy with it because the first time in my life I had answers for my questions. Yeah. Because I pressured my teachers to be able to have answers, and of course, especially in the physical field, they had some answers, that on the invisible field there were very little answers. And you may say that if you look at history, then there's people studying a lot of these aspects. In science they would call them materialists. And there's people studying these aspects, and they would call them non-materialists or spiritualists. And of course, the Oriental point of view, also the Native American point of view, is more talking about the waves. And within the, let's say, newest development in physics, which is called quantum physics, they discovered studying things always in a smaller and a smaller and a smaller aspect. And they then found finally everything there in the smallest aspect is nothing but chaos. And then if they do it in the macrocosm, study the universe further and further. One of them, he died recently, Stephen Hawking. He said it's the same there. It's all chaos. So it raised their question, then what decides that chaos is appearing in some aspects of reality? Now, even within quantum physics, there's lots of different points of view. So I'm trying to combine some that make, to me, some logic. In the quantum physics, for instance, they study how material or matter appears. And at the moment, let's say the most promising theory that actually is not far away from the wave theory and from some chemical theories too, is that before everything appears, it's of course invisible. Yeah. And one of the major theories is from Schrödinger, and his point of view is that everything is a wave, and the wave is on its way to being, they call it collapsed. Collapsed means it appears in the form of a physicalized particle. And the physicalized particle is different according to the level of waves. But their point of view is interesting because they say everything is a wave, and so the real reality is invisible, it's just waves. And the whole universe is just full of waves. And the waves carry, it's an interesting word, they carry information. And information is moving in waves, and then when the particle appears, then you may say it's like matter. You can easily understand it if you look at light. When we, especially in the summer, when the sky is blue and we look up to the sky, then we see little particles appearing, which are on the level of light, so we call them photons. And the photon is very active on the physical world. Like if we have a simple system like hydrogen atom, that's a proton and an electron. And then physical realities start to build up in more, let's say, advanced or more accumulating atoms, and they become molecules, and the molecules continue together, and we get more and more complicated structures because the electrons catch photons. So they catch it, and then they materialize more. First it's a wave, you don't see it. It's actually, when we study the movement of the electron goes invisible. Yeah, goes invisible. Can't find it anymore. See? And then it catches energy from a wave, which then also becomes a photon, and by that the electron can change into another position. Yeah. So the information that is there captured by the molecule makes that it gets more and more heavy. And of course it's always interesting to look at the middle. Within the physical world, it's the carbohydrates. And so as soon as there is carbon, yeah, the whole action of becoming physically visible in reality gets like a big step higher. Now, of course, the carbohydrates, we know, are made by the plants. Yeah. And so the plants are just by using photosynthesis, catching always more and more photons, and so that means they're catching first invisible waves, yeah, that carry the information, and then the information is materialized, you may say, and then the atom gets expanded. And so, of course, it's an issue in quantum physics always also that where does the electron go? See, it seems like appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing. You may know that there is a stroboscope that's making light with velocity, and it has interruption between giving light and not giving light. And when it gets faster and faster, then you cannot see the difference anymore between light and the dark part. So the appearance of light and the disappearance of light, you can't see it anymore. So because we have a visible spectrum that doesn't go further than that. And so the same happens on molecular level. the electron is appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing. That means that, according to some quantum physicists, they say it must be the same in the universe as a total. That means that for them, the universe is appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. They even have an idea of the speed of it. 14 times a second that the universe appears and disappears. But that means, if we take it personal, it's the same with us, you see? So we appear and disappear. Then, of course, they have a question, then what makes it reappear again? Now, they have a theory about it. And they have also, and that's where it's linking with the Native Americans and, let's say, with Oriental point of view, information, the word says it's on the way to a form. It's just like when we catch radio waves of television waves, we have an equipment, and the equipment makes that information either that we can hear it, or we can hear it and we can see it. That's the way our brain works. Of course, it's more complicated. But another point of view of information is that information is the same as consciousness. That means that all the waves are just waves of consciousness that carry the information, which we can call consciousness, and that the consciousness gradually appears in a form. Now, we may, I usually use some process which is to the scientists a very big question, and that is when everything disappears, then it's chaos. But if you look in the physical world, we can see like a caterpillar, Caterpillar eats like crazy. Caterpillar, eats like crazy. All the time, eating, a lot of vegetables. And then makes itself into a cocoon, spins a cocoon, and then science gets into trouble. Within the cocoon, the caterpillar, caterpillar dissolves. I mean, within the cocoon, there is nothing anymore than liquid. That's interesting. So the whole structure of the caterpillar is dissolved into, you may say, if you look at it, even if they make like with electromagnetic resonance trying to figure out what's in there, well, it's chaos. It's a liquid full of chaos of small particles, and if they study the small particles, of course, they finally end up with quarks. That's the level of quantum physics, quarks. And then they wonder, how come then that liquid becomes a butterfly? Interesting, huh? That means the whole chaos gets reorganized into, finally, a butterfly. Now, they have some answers on that, and that's a particular interesting topic in quantum physics. That is, there is an observer. And when the observer looks at a wave, the wave collapses into physical reality. So that means it's interesting. Let's say it's an interesting point of view. That means that if you make it on a bigger view, that all reality, means you may say every type of consciousness gets collapsed into reality by an observer. Now we can understand that means that caterpillar has consciousness, and even if it dissolves its body, by keeping the same image, you may say the observing activity of the butterfly, which is not a butterfly yet, decides how that consciousness, which is totally dissolved in quarks, finally reorganizes itself into a butterfly. That call it the observer activity. Now they've been going on further on that level, and so that's interesting again, because then they say, well, so everything that is materialized has consciousness. That means a grain of sand has consciousness. Now that's not new for Native Americans, and that's not new for the Oriental point of view. It all has consciousness. And it just raises consciousness, you may say, in the physical world by catching photons, but the photon actually is just a wave of information, a wave of consciousness. And so every matter that advances, or what we call advancement in more complicated structures, means just this gathering capacity of consciousness. Now they have a different way of dividing reality. Anything to clean? Oh, I'll put it on the side. They look at different levels of waves. Now waves, of course, have a frequency. Frequency means that's which kind of space they have in a certain amount of time. That's frequency. And has a speed. And so they have like a triangular point of view. And then they say, well, we have the level of where everything gets into a most condensed form. And when it's the most condensed form, that means the waves have a very low frequency. They have a big wavelength. So that means these ones, very large wavelength. And they all call it, they call it the Hertzian reality. That's the slowest reality. And so they say consciousness is moving there in a very slow way. So they look at consciousness as just different, you may say, velocity, different frequencies. Then, above that, they call it, the speed is different, they call it the reality of infrared frequencies. Infrared frequencies is, for instance, what operates or where you are during the night. You're going to infrared frequencies. So you can see life in a negative way. I mean, like in photography, you have the negative in order to make a positive. One level up, faster frequency, is called visible light. So that's where the whole thing with waves turn into photons. Now for them there is a different point of view than what we studied in our spirals. For them, polarity only exists on these three levels. Yeah, interesting, huh? That means they consider levels of consciousness, or levels of speed of waves, or levels of information where there is no polarity. Where the waves do not split in, or we may say, not split in yin and yang, or do not split in waves, because that's polarity. See, we can call this the wave as yin, and we can call the particle as yang. And so everything beyond the speed of light, and that was already trouble for Einstein, because Einstein thought that was the maximum the maximum speed. It's already proven wrong. Quantum physics already found 4 big errors in Einstein's theories. 4 big ones. One of that is the speed of light, first, is not at all constant, and second, there's many more other speeds than the speeds of light. That means there's many other more levels of information, or there is many other levels of consciousness. Above polarity. Now, they call that first level of polarity, of non-polarity that's above it, they call it, it uses ultraviolet speed of frequency. You know, when we study light, we have the visible light, we have infrared, we have far infrared, and then on the other end we have ultraviolet. That's the polarity view. For them it says, no, there is no polarity there. Number 5, that's on the level of the speed of X-rays. Very fast. So the faster it is, the less we see it, and also the more it's penetrating. Even more fast is gamma rays. just a few weeks ago, they published research that all these faraway constellations, yeah, in galaxies are sending out all the time gamma rays that penetrate everything, yeah, including the Earth. So everything that is, you may say, is all the time under radiation of consciousness. To the quantum physics point of view, that use this model, because there's other models too. I'm just taking a few out. That means that we're all the time picking up consciousness, and that means, where do we get it? So how do we use our equipment to get that type of consciousness? Then for them, that you may have heard, on the top. Or you may say the 7th level of consciousness, according to this point of view. They call it, you may have heard it, point zero. Yeah? The 0 point or point zero. Or sometimes they use also infinity, point zero. But point zero, their point of view at looking at point zero means, on that level, there is only potential. Yeah. Potential. That means from that level of point zero, or sometimes they also call it the quantum field. The quantum field has only potential, but if you look from here, it has nothing materialized. Nothing materialized, but everything's possible. And of course, they try to image on that visible light level, how the quantum field is moving, and it's all the time like, almost like dancing in a waveform, and sometimes some things pop up, they appear and they disappear. But everything in the quantum field is possible. That means, if we relate it to our consciousness, if we are able to use that maximum level of consciousness, then we can make whatever we want. Interesting theory, huh? Now, they say, so the point zero, you may say, creates, or from point zero, from the quantum field, everything is created, but it goes always with a slower and slower and slower speed. Until, like from the visible light level, from there it disappears. Some of them, it's interesting, made a relationship with how does our physical structure work. Yeah. And of course we have the Indian way of looking at it, the body with 7 chakras. And then they say, well, these 3 lower ones operate according to these levels. And that means 1, 2, 3. And as Bill this morning was saying, number 4 is always interesting. Yeah. So number 4 is that one. Yeah. Which is, you may say, if you use it as a physical word, then you say it's the heart. Yeah. If you use it the invisible part, then we call it the soul. Yeah. And then there is a link in between, because along all these chakras, you know, there are glands. So the gland that is like vibrating, you may say, with a level of consciousness from body to soul and from soul to body. There is a gland in between that they already investigated. Some people that really work hard on consciousness level to raise their consciousness, then their thymus gland is the one in between, and the thymus gland gets reactivated. So that means, as a baby, you have a very active thymus gland, and then gradually, and then in some interpretations of consciousness, they will say, gradually you forget to live according to your heart, or you forget to live according to your soul, and the thymus gland just disappears. Well, that doesn't disappear, it becomes like a dry flower. Mm-hmm. So then you can see that more teachers that are teaching the wave theory or the spiritual theory usually talk about, if they want to talk to people, then they speak about the soul or they speak about the heart. Yeah. Mentioning, you may say, number 4. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And say you cannot raise your consciousness, or you have to raise your consciousness if you want to go up, you have to raise your speed, your speed of vibration. And that goes in the beginning automatic. As a baby, you automatically grow. But from here on, you have to do it more and more consciously. Yeah. That's a different wave. I mean, that means you have to be the observer that consciously helps to collapse waves into reality. That means already from level 4, if you use that level of consciousness, you can make what you want. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, some of the spiritual masters in the past, it seems they were able to do that. Like Jesus was creating what we call miracles, using his level of consciousness to be able to just realize things that on lower levels, automatically people react, that's not possible. You see? But on the quantum field, everything's possible. Just have to connect with it by raising your consciousness. Now, what is interesting here is between the physical world and the non-physical world, the waves are translated. I don't need to wipe it out. The waves are translated in what we call our genetic waves. That means the waves go into, you may call it our cells, that's on the level of the cells, that need all this to be able to continue to live. And among quantum physics, there's also people active in neuroscience. For them, a cell cannot die. Interesting, cannot die. Unless there is what we call in our medical approach, where there is degeneration. Now, on this level you may say we have some combination of waves that physically speaking or biologically speaking we call it DNA. The DNA carries waves, first of all large waves, that means the more slow ones. Practically speaking, that means the waves from your genetics. And the most close genetic is from your parents and your grandparents. That's how it's translated, or how the waves are translated in your cellular matter. Now, a cell has a wall, a membrane. The first one is around the cell, then you have the cell plasma, then you have the nucleus. The nucleus also has a membrane. And then of course you have the DNA system inside, and you have the RNA system more active in the plasma, that when the DNA opens, then the RNA catches nutrients. And the nutrients are then used in order to make a replica of your DNA. So you continue to either make a new cell or you remake the cell. That means you keep it alive, you keep it in a healthy form. Now, they found out on the cellular level that on these membranes there are receptors. And the receptors can be open or closed. Important. That means it can be full of nutrients around the cell or even within the cell. If the receptors are not open, the nutrients just don't go in. That means you can have a fantastic rich diet and your body full of nutrients. If the receptors are not open, it doesn't go in. That means that the RNA can only use what can enter through the receptors. Now they're of course studying in neuroscience that what is keeping the receptors open or closed. Because if they're closed, that means the RNA cannot use the nutrients. And then of course they were studying that to figure out, okay, then what is making these receptors on this side and also on the deeper side open or close? Then of course, it's neuroscience, they found out it's moving with waves. Here we go. That means that there is waves that you get, you may say, or that materialize in your genetic system, but also that genetic system is all the time influenced by shorter waves, yeah, that translate into that direction. So it means that something on this level, which we can call them higher levels of consciousness, are influencing also whether you change genetically, and influencing how you can use your nutrients. We can easily understand, to keep it open, what do we need? An open mind. The open mind makes that electromagnetically these receptors are just open, and then you can take in the nutrients. So now we understand that people with some mental issues, even if they eat fantastically, it just doesn't do anything, or not enough, you see? Because the receptors are closed. And so you may say that the level of consciousness is deciding what happens in that way and gets materialized in how your receptors pick up either from the outside into the cell plasma or from the cell plasma into the cell nucleus and decide what's going to go on to rebuild your cells or keep them young, you may say. And so they consider that when the receptors are closed, that's probably the reason why a cell is degenerating. And that's probably the reason why the cell cannot feed itself, cannot make a nice replica, and cannot make a new cell, according to what was already genetically there. And so the levels of consciousness decide what's going on in your physical reality. Yeah, interesting, huh? That means that even if we try to make a lot of physical effort to try to change our DNA, if the receptors are closed, we're stuck, yeah? Until we change consciousness. And of course, even when you want to change your diet, before you do it, what changes? Your consciousness. Huh? You open your mind to a new way of thinking and a new way of going to another shop. That changes, it's all changes of consciousness. And so, in neuroscience, they would call this influence, they would call it attitudes. And so they were studying attitudes, which attitudes are helpful and which attitudes are not helpful. Now, generally speaking, they say when the receptors close, it's because of stress. Now, that's a general word for whether you feel relaxed, that means open, yeah, or when you feel totally contracted. And they were studying some of the attitudes that makes you contracted. For instance, like fear. Do you relax with fear? No, you see, you get contracted. So they're studying different aspects of attitudes, and a lot of them that let's say that we use day to day, are contracting attitudes, which then finally closes our receptors. Yeah. Wow. So quantum physics is moving into figuring out how consciousness works, yeah? And how it works, finally capturing photons and making it into physical reality. And of course the attitudes are the attitudes of the observer. Yeah. That's you. So everybody, to that quantum physics point of view, materialize reality according to your attitudes. It's an interesting point of view because of course they say, well, it's also like a pendulum. That means we move from, oh yeah, let's do that, into, oh, maybe not. Maybe that's too difficult. You see, then your doubts come up. That means you are like moving between what they call like a channel, yeah, between point zero, every capacity. I like to do that, but it's not going to work. But while you do that, let's say that if you take the future, I like to do that, and then you start thinking about it, so you go to the other side of the pendulum, passing point zero. It's interesting to have a word for that. Yeah. This they would call like information and consciousness, and that can be enhanced with knowledge. Yeah. Knowledge is an English word which uses the word now. Knowingness is always has to do with the now. So if you go between future and past, you may say, you pass the now. And so after you made an idea, okay, that's what I want to do, then you reflect on it. Usually for Western people is doubts. Yeah, I can do it. Maybe I have to do that, and maybe then it won't work. So, and then what actually materializes is the last thought you had before you pass the middle position. Yeah. And interesting, they call that middle position understanding. You stand under it. You see? They made a big difference between understanding and knowledge. Knowledge is just information that you can make into reality or not, but you have to observe it. Yeah, means you have to, just like the caterpillar is observing that his dream, you may say, of becoming a butterfly, and then continues with that, we would call it focus, and that doesn't give it up, and then finally materializes his new form of life. So he has a strong observation quality. Yeah? But it also is interesting to know that, let's see, as our life, what is our life? Well, everything that goes into a pause. So if you have an ideal, you focus on it, and you keep the focus, then that makes that reality collapse. Of course, if your receptors are open, but that happens, that is according to your attitudes. If your attitudes, for instance, are doubt, then you swing to the other end, and then when you move back after thinking, yeah, but I'm too weak to do it, then that's the last thought you had before swinging back to the middle, and then exactly that thought will become our reality. You see? So that's an interesting point of view where quantum physics and neuroscience and biochemistry is combining, because then we can better understand where does our reality come from. When it swings back, keeping the last short wave, going into the larger wave, going into the physical reality, and then you may say, boom, popping up in what we experience as physical reality. Interesting things to think about it, huh? Thank you.